Regency England had a talent for remembering disgrace longer than it remembered kindness, and so the name of Lady Eliza Harrowby was spoken that winter in half-voices and lifted brows, carried like damp silk through drawing-rooms and vestries alike. She was the daughter of a ruined peer, it was said, and had vanished on the very eve of a marriage arranged to salvage a crumbling title. Some whispered flight, others madness, a few cruelty. None spoke of fear, for fear had no pedigree. By dusk, her name reached the county where a duke had learned to live without his. For 10 years the Duke of Ashcombe had kept his world small, measured by hedgerows and stone, by the orderly ticking of clocks and the careful distance between servants and self. He was a widower, yes, but that was the least of his absences. A broken betrothal, a courtly loyalty repaid with suspicion, a scandal never proven yet never forgotten, these had pressed him from London into the long corridors of his ancestral house, where portraits watched without forgiveness. He governed his days with propriety and his nights with silence, believing that discipline could cauterize memory. On the evening the rain began, the bells of St. Cuthbert's tolled vespers with a weary insistence, as if the weather itself required absolution. Wind worried the elms and sent sheets of water racing along the drive. Ashcombe Manor, set back from the road, stood patient beneath its lamps. Within, the Duke read by firelight, a ledger open, the past arranged into columns he might control. When the knock came, it did not sound like ceremony. It sounded like collapse. They found her where the light thinned, on the threshold that divided shelter from the elements. A young gentlewoman lay senseless upon the stone, her gown unmistakable even in ruin, white silk darkened to grey, lace torn, hems heavy with mud. Rain threaded her hair into her face, and the veil, once an emblem, clung to her hand like a plea. The servants hesitated, trained as they were to protect the house from impropriety as much as from thieves. The Duke did not. He crossed the hall, and in crossing, broke a rule he had not known he kept. She woke in a room that had known grief and therefore offered no lies. The curtains were drawn against the weather, the air faint with lavender and smoke. A maid stood watch, a matron sat near, and at the far side of the room the Duke kept his distance, hat removed, posture exact. When her eyes opened, he did not speak first. He waited, granting her the dignity of consciousness before explanation. Her voice, when it came, was thin but steady. She asked where she was. He told her. She asked under what terms. He told her those too. Sanctuary, he said, was a lawful thing, but it must be governed. Separate quarters. A chaperone at all hours. Letters opened by consent, not force. No visits unannounced, no doors closed without cause. He spoke as one accustomed to order, yet his eyes betrayed an attention that startled her, as if he were memorizing a face he had no intention of touching. She listened, nodded, and accepted with a composure that suggested she had practiced endurance longer than trust. By morning, the rain had thinned to a whisper, and with the light came consequence. A groom recognized the gown's cut, a footman knew the family crest worked faintly into the lace. News did not need invitation. It took a horse and a tongue, and soon enough the village had its story, a bride at the Duke's door, unclaimed. Respectability leaned away from the manor as if it carried contagion. Letters arrived with careful concern. Silence arrived with sharper teeth. When the Duke learned her name, it was from her own mouth. Lady Eliza Harrowby said it plainly, without appeal. She did not beg him to believe her, only to permit her to remain until she might determine her next step without compulsion. In that request lay the heart of her flight. The marriage she had fled was lawful, lucrative, and merciless. Consent had been assumed as inheritance is assumed, by right and by pressure. She would not speak ill of her family, she said, but she would not return. He answered her with restraint, and in that restraint, something altered. He could turn her out and preserve the quiet that had become his armor. He could send her onward and re-enter the good graces of a world that preferred its scandals distant. Instead, he offered time. Not protection as possession, but protection as pause. The manor would hold her, he said, as stone holds heat, without promise and without threat. Before evening, a courier arrived from the county seat, boots still wet, bearing inquiries framed as courtesy. They asked after the Duke's health, the state of his tenants, the unusual traffic upon his drive. No names were written, yet the wax was crimson and precise. Ashcombe understood such handwriting. It belonged to offices that never knocked and memories that never slept. He dismissed the messenger with thanks and stood a long while at the window, watching crows lift from the fields, knowing that shelter, once given, becomes a matter not only of conscience but of power. Tonight, he sensed the court had turned its face toward Ashcombe. That afternoon, as clouds parted over the wet lawns, the Duke stood alone in the long gallery and regarded the portraits again. He saw in their painted eyes the judgments he had already endured, and in their still mouths the counsel they would never give. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed softly. A woman he did not know, yet already could not dismiss, had been folded into the careful order of his days. The bells had ceased, the rain had passed, and still the house listened, aware that its solitude had been interrupted by a name the world would not forgive. Morning altered the rhythm of Ashcombe without announcing itself. The house did not stir so much as it adjusted, as if each corridor had learned to breathe around an additional presence. Lady Eliza moved within the boundaries set for her with a careful grace, never early, never late, her steps measured to the chime of clocks that had governed the Duke's solitude for a decade. She took her meals in the small breakfast room with a matron present, her letters folded but unopened, her gaze attentive to the windows, where winter light thinned the world into pale watercolors. Restraint became their shared language. The Duke observed her first from a distance that felt proper and then from one that felt necessary. He noticed how she listened, not merely to words but to pauses, how she thanked servants by name, how she arranged flowers herself rather than requesting it be done. These details, insignificant to society, unsettled him more than her beauty would have done. He had known women skilled in ornament and performance, he had not known many practiced in quiet endurance. When he offered her the use of the library at appointed hours, she accepted as though the gift were trust itself, not paper and leather. It was there, amid the hush of shelves, that their conversations grew. They spoke of books first, safely, of sermons admired and poems endured. He corrected her gently on a passage of Milton, she challenged him, just as gently, on a line of Cooper. The matron sat nearby, stitching, her presence both barrier and witness. What passed between them did so without touch, yet with an intensity that unsettled the air, as if meaning itself leaned closer. When he excused himself, she rose. When she thanked him, he inclined his head. Politeness held back a current neither named. Outside the manor, politeness frayed. The village received visitors who did not linger long enough to be welcomed. A pair of gentlemen called one afternoon, hats too new, concern too practiced. They asked after the Duke's health, then after his charity, then after the unusual quiet of his household. He answered with precision and offered nothing further. By evening, a note arrived from a distant cousin suggesting discretion. By morning, a sermon cautioned against sheltering temptation beneath noble roofs. Eliza heard none of it directly, yet she felt the tightening, like a frost unseen but present. The first gift he gave her was not personal enough to be misunderstood, yet not impersonal enough to be meaningless. A cloak, dark and serviceable, lined against cold, arrived folded on a chair with a brief note granting permission for walks in the lower garden during specified hours. She traced the cloth with reverent fingers, understanding what it offered: air without exposure, movement without escape. When she wore it, he did not comment, but his gaze lingered a fraction longer than before. The cloak altered how she stood, how she breathed, how she belonged, briefly, to the land. Rumor, denied entry, pressed against the walls. A carriage passed too slowly. A groom reported questions asked at the inn. Eliza's family crest appeared in a pamphlet circulated at market, her name omitted yet unmistakable. The Duke read it by lamplight, anger measured but sharp, and burned it without ceremony. That night, he drafted a letter he did not send, then another he sealed and placed aside. His instinct was to protect through authority, yet authority had failed him before. What remained was judgment, and judgment required patience. Eliza sensed the change and mistook it for fatigue. She prepared herself to depart, arranging her few belongings with a deliberation that suggested finality. When the Duke encountered her thus engaged, she spoke first, voice steady though her hands trembled. She would not, she said, allow her presence to become a weapon against him. She thanked him for shelter and for time, which had been more generous than rescue. He listened without interruption, his face composed, and in that composure she read refusal before he gave it. "You are not a burden," he said at last, choosing each word as one chooses a step across ice. "Nor are you my charge." He paused, and the pause mattered. "You are my guest, under my protection, by my decision." It was the boldest thing he had said in years, and he said it quietly. The matron pretended not to hear. Eliza bowed her head, not in submission but in acknowledgement, and something in the room shifted from endurance toward allegiance. The shift did not go unnoticed. A summons arrived bearing the unmistakable authority of London, its language courteous and unyielding. It requested clarification, attendance, and resolution. Eliza was named at last, her flight framed as inconvenience rather than injustice. The Duke read the letter twice, then folded it with care. When he met Eliza's eyes across the table, neither spoke, yet both understood that refuge had acquired a deadline, and that whatever gift time had been, it was now nearly spent. Night drew the manor inward, gathering its long corridors into a single breath. Lamps were lowered, fires banked, and the hush that followed felt deliberate, as though the house itself had agreed to keep counsel. Eliza moved through the gallery with measured steps, the echo of her slippers softened by rugs whose colors had faded into gentler truths. She had asked for this meeting, and the asking had cost her more than the rain ever had. When the Duke entered from the far end, he carried no papers, no authority but his name, and he stopped at a distance that honored both caution and resolve. They stood beneath portraits that had witnessed vows made for reasons other than love. The air smelled faintly of wax and old wood, a scent that steadied her. She spoke first, not because she was braver, but because delay had begun to feel like another form of surrender. She told him of the betrothal without ornament, of a contract arranged in rooms where her presence had been symbolic, of a future mapped by men who confused obedience with virtue. She described the night she fled, the carriage taken at dawn, the road slick with rain, the certainty that if she returned she would disappear without ever having chosen herself. He listened with a stillness that invited honesty. When she faltered, he did not fill the silence. He did not console. He allowed the truth to complete itself. In that permission, she found the courage to finish. She said she had come to his door because doors close differently when they belong to men who know disgrace. She said she would accept exile, work, anonymity, anything but the life decided for her. When she finished, she lowered her eyes, as though awaiting a sentence she had already endured. The Duke answered by confessing his own beginning. He spoke of loyalty mistaken for ambition, of counsel given in good faith and repaid with rumor, of a betrothal broken not by infidelity but by fear. He spoke of his wife with restraint, honoring her without enshrining grief, and of the vow he had made thereafter to live unentangled, believing solitude to be safer than hope. His voice did not waver, yet something in it softened, like stone warmed by a long sun. He admitted that shelter had not been charity alone, that her presence had disturbed the careful geometry of his days. They faced one another then, no longer host and guest but equals within confession. He told her what the letter from London required, what compliance would preserve, what refusal would cost. He did not disguise the peril, nor did he present himself as savior. Instead, he offered clarity, which felt rarer. She understood that staying would endanger him, that leaving would satisfy the world while undoing her. The choice hovered between them, heavy with consequence, yet curiously lightened by the fact that it was named. He crossed the gallery to a small table and placed upon it his signet ring. The metal caught the lamplight and held it. He did not push it toward her. He did not explain it. He said only that it had sealed letters of command and apology alike, that it had represented his name when he no longer wished to speak. Now, he said, it could rest there, unclaimed. If she wished to depart, it would not follow her. If she wished to remain, it would not bind her. Choice, he said again, and let the word breathe. Eliza felt the room steady around that offering. She did not reach for the ring. Instead, she told him what she had not told anyone, that fear had taught her to mistake survival for living, that dignity had been demanded of her without regard for joy, that the quiet he offered had shown her a different measure of worth. She said she did not know what love required, only that it could not begin where consent ended. Her voice trembled once, then held. She looked at him fully, not pleading, not defiant, but present. The Duke replied with a promise framed as restraint. He would not ask her for gratitude, nor for affection purchased by protection. He would stand between her and compulsion so long as she wished him to do so, and no longer. He would bear the scrutiny, the censure, the cost. He would do it because it was right, and because he had learned that righteousness without mercy is merely another tyranny. He did not name love. He honored it by not claiming it. Between them stretched a silence that felt newly made, not inherited. In it, Eliza sensed the future narrowing to a single question she had never been allowed to ask herself. She considered the manor beyond the gallery, the gardens constrained by hedges yet generous with paths, the clocks that governed without cruelty, the servants whose eyes had learned respect by example. She considered the Duke as he was now, not as rumor had shaped him, and recognized a kinship forged by endurance rather than desire. The recognition frightened her less than it steadied her, and for the first time since her flight, she felt the possibility of standing still without being trapped. A sound at the door broke the stillness, gentle yet insistent. A servant entered, eyes lowered, bearing a letter sealed in crimson wax. The Duke took it, weighing the familiar authority with a hand that did not tremble. Eliza watched his face as he read, reading the reading, sensing the tightening of a future pressing nearer. When he folded the letter and met her gaze, the ring remained between them, bright and undecided. Outside, the wind rose again, as if the night itself awaited her answer. No answer was asked for, yet both understood that dawn would demand one, and that whatever she chose would redraw the boundaries of duty, desire, and the fragile peace he had sworn to protect, for them both now. The morning arrived with a brittle clarity, the frost crisp along the drive and the hedges silvered by a thin glaze of ice. Ashcombe Manor seemed to hold its breath as though it, too, awaited judgment. Eliza moved with purposeful steps through the hall, her cloak trailing quietly behind her, fingers brushing the polished wood banisters as if seeking reassurance. Today was different. The letter from London had not been ignored, it had been read, discussed, and returned with instructions that left no room for evasion. The Crown demanded presence, compliance, and resolution. The walls of the manor, which had once promised shelter, now pressed close with expectation. The Duke met her in the gallery, the usual distance between them diminished, deliberate but unspoken. There was no need for preamble, both understood that decorum and desire were now bound by circumstance. He offered her a chair by the tall window, where the winter light fell in pale rectangles across the floorboards. She did not sit immediately, instead allowing her gaze to travel across the portraits that had observed his life for decades. Each painted gaze seemed to measure her, weighing her presence, as though society itself were embodied in brushstrokes. She inhaled, steadying herself, and at last lowered herself into the seat with quiet grace, hands folded in her lap. "Lady Eliza," he began, voice even yet carrying weight beyond the formality, "the matter of your departure, or your continued residence, has been made clear to me. I am to ensure your compliance with commands that leave you little choice, yet I shall offer none but that which is just." He paused, letting each word settle like stones across the gallery floor. "Yet I cannot ignore the fact that you arrived here unbidden, and that in doing so, you have altered more than a room or a household. You have altered me." Eliza's lips parted, not in surprise, but in acknowledgement. "My lord, I came seeking refuge, not disturbance. I feared I might find neither, yet here I remain." Her tone was measured, but the tremor beneath it betrayed the tension she had carried from storm-swept roads to this gilded hall. "I owe you obedience, and yet obedience is insufficient when the heart is not consulted." He nodded slowly, the gesture one of respect, and crossed to the table, where a folded cloak, the first gift he had offered her, lay untouched. "You speak of hearts," he said, "as though they might be unbound from duty. Yet in the world, duty is the measure by which we are judged. I have learned that my own heart, if stirred beyond measure, invites ruin." And yet, he left the sentence suspended, letting the quiet do the work of truth. He looked at her then, fully, as though scanning her very being. "I would sooner bear the censure of the crown than the knowledge that you were compelled against your will." She looked back, measuring the gravity of his words, the steadiness in his eyes that belied the storm of emotion he must have contained. She had known few men capable of restraint, fewer still who combined it with intention. "Then what am I to do," she asked softly, "when all the world would claim me, and yet one man offers choice without coercion?" His hand hovered briefly over the cloak, a silent gesture of permission, and then he withdrew it. "The choice, Lady Eliza, is yours. Remain, and I shall protect your honor with every lawful means at my disposal. Leave, and I will ensure your passage is unharmed, though it may satisfy neither heart nor rumor." He paused, gaze unwavering, and added, "I offer this not as favor, but as truth." The words, plain and unadorned, carried more intimacy than many declarations of love. She understood the weight of them, the courage required to speak as he had without embellishment. In the quiet of the gallery, the world outside seemed distant, reduced to whispers and footsteps. She drew a deep breath, feeling the tension of 10 years of flight and 10 years of solitude compress into a single, clarifying moment. The decision was hers, yet it was framed by a new kind of morality, one that honored dignity, choice, and consequence alike. Eliza rose, moving closer to the table, fingers brushing the fabric of the cloak, not to claim it, but to acknowledge the offering. "Then I shall stay," she said, each word deliberate. "Not as a guest who seeks shelter, but as a woman who chooses her place in this house, under your protection, and with the freedom to act according to my conscience." Her voice, steady and clear, reverberated against the gallery walls, carrying a quiet triumph that neither arrogance nor fear could claim. The Duke inclined his head, the movement small yet full of significance. "So it shall be," he said. "And in this choice, know that both our names may face scrutiny, yet neither shall be diminished if we hold steadfast to honor." He stepped aside, allowing her to move past him toward the windows where the frost still glimmered, reflecting pale morning light. The Manor exhaled, if it were capable, as though recognizing a tension resolved, though fragile, delicate as spun glass. They spent the remainder of the morning in measured tasks, conversation flowing in cautious, yet unmistakable intimacy. She walked the galleries with him, observing how he traced the contours of the portraits, commenting on brushwork and lineage, and he noticed the subtle way she adjusted her stance to accommodate light and shadow, movement and stillness. Words became gestures, gestures became understanding. There was no touch, yet proximity conveyed warmth. Each glance, each nod, each silent acknowledgement deepened the fragile bridge between them. Afternoon drew in with a soft, pearled light spilling through the frost-lined windows. Footsteps approached the main entrance, deliberate and measured. A servant entered quietly, bearing another letter, smaller than the previous, its wax seal the same deep crimson. The Duke received it without immediate glance, folding his hands briefly, then turned to Eliza. "It seems," he said, voice tempered with calm, "that the world is not yet willing to let us choose unobserved." She caught her breath, recognizing the weight in that simple statement. The letter was more than parchment, it was a reminder that choice came at a cost, that their quiet alignment within these walls was neither private nor free from consequence. Yet, for the first time since her flight, she felt not fear alone, but resolve. The manor had become more than refuge, it was a space of negotiation, of unspoken accord, where dignity and desire could coexist. The Duke broke the silence, folding the letter with deliberate care. "We shall read it together," he said, offering her a place by the hearth, "and consider how best to act without surrendering principle." Her fingers brushed the edge of the desk as she moved closer, and the warmth of the fire flickered across both their faces, casting long, shared shadows upon the polished floor. In that quiet, they stood as equals, bound not by scandal, but by a fragile understanding, the future still uncertain, yet their course, however perilous, now chosen together. And outside, as the winter light softened against the frost, the gates of Ashcombe remained closed against rumor, yet open to the unfolding of a trust that neither time nor threat could undo, though what awaited beyond the threshold, neither could yet foresee. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and still, a fragile frost glimmering across the manor lawns, the light pale and steady as if the day itself had been composed for witness. Ashcombe Manor, usually subdued in winter restraint, seemed to pulse with anticipation. Servants moved with quiet precision, adjusting curtains, brushing rugs, arranging flowers in simple vases, each gesture a testament to the respect born of years of service. The air smelled of pine boughs and polished wood, and faint smoke from the kitchen chimneys drifted upward, carrying warmth that would mingle with the chill of the morning. Outside, the horizon promised sun, though faint, as if blessing the day without ceremony. Eliza descended the staircase slowly, the hem of her gown whispering over each tread, her hands folded at her waist, fingers laced over one another as though to steady the flutter in her chest. The dress was modest yet elegant, white silk tempered with subtle embroidery, and a pale rose ribbon at her neck echoed a hope she had scarcely allowed herself to name. Her hair, freed from confinement for the first time in weeks, fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, catching the light like spun gold. She paused at the landing, taking a breath, allowing herself the quiet acknowledgement of what she had endured and what she now embraced. Today, she would choose her life, and in doing so, she would claim her dignity. The Duke waited at the far end of the gallery, near the doorway that led to the chapel, posture straight, hands lightly clasped behind his back. His coat, dark and stately, fell perfectly along his frame, but it was not the cut of the clothing that held her attention, it was the way he stood, still yet alive, composed yet not devoid of feeling. When their eyes met, the frost of the morning seemed to vanish, leaving only understanding. No words were exchanged at first. The weight of the moment carried its own gravity. He offered a small bow of acknowledgement, and she returned it, a silent contract between them, formal and intimate. As they moved together toward the chapel, the house seemed to hold its breath once more. The corridors, lined with portraits and tapestries, witnessed their passage with quiet gravity. They passed the library, where months of measured conversation had become foundation, the gallery, where decisions had been weighed, the gardens, where frost had once obscured steps now meant to be taken with courage. Each space spoke of their journey, and neither could step past without recognizing the endurance required to arrive at this day. The chapel itself was modest, sunlight spilling through stained glass to paint the floors in muted jewel tones. The pews, arranged for dignity rather than spectacle, were empty but for the officiant, a matron to witness propriety, and the Duke's closest steward. There was no audience of gossips, no parade of peers, only the bare, essential witness of order and law. The air was scented faintly with beeswax and pine, and the silence was alive with possibility, charged with a restraint neither could afford to break prematurely. Eliza's breath caught as the Duke approached the altar. He offered her his arm, not as possession, but as support. She took it, the contact brief, formal, yet grounding, an acknowledgement of partnership rather than dominance. Words were chosen with care, each one carrying centuries of expectation tempered by the honesty of the moment. When they spoke their vows, there were no flourishes, no overt displays of passion, only the clarity of choice, consent, and acknowledgement. "I stand beside you, not by command, nor by expectation, but by my own will," the Duke said, voice steady yet resonant, echoing faintly against stone. "And I accept you as equal, as companion, and as woman whose judgment I honor." Eliza's reply mirrored his tone, calm yet sincere, the cadence of each syllable deliberate. "I accept, not for refuge alone, but for trust, for partnership, and for the life we choose together." When the ceremony concluded, the Duke and Lady Eliza remained at the altar a moment longer, hands apart yet aligned, the weight of the choice settling between them like sunlight warming frost. The matron nodded, acknowledging completion without intrusion. Outside, the wind rose softly, ruffling the hem of her gown, catching the Duke's coat in a gentle breeze. The world beyond the chapel gates, once hostile and demanding, seemed to acknowledge a shift, an order restored, yet renewed by the courage of two who had chosen it deliberately, morally, and with conscience intact. They stepped into the courtyard together, the frost yielding beneath their careful steps. Carriage wheels awaited for journeys yet to be taken, servants discreetly aligning along the periphery. The manor itself seemed to exhale, its long corridors, galleries, and gardens having borne witness to the resolution of tension that had lasted seasons. For a brief moment, the landscape beyond the gates felt untroubled, as if the past, the scandal, the rumors, the threat of separation, had been folded away beneath the grace of choice and honor. As they walked, hands brushing lightly, not seeking warmth but acknowledging proximity, Eliza glanced toward the horizon, where sunlight promised longer days. "The world will still speak," she said softly, voice caught between reflection and hope. "And yet, we have done what we could, with dignity." The Duke inclined his head, a faint smile touching lips that rarely curved. "Let them speak," he replied. "Our measure is not in rumor, but in truth." A hush fell again, a gentle pause, before the wind carried a new sound across the courtyard, the faint echo of distant hooves, deliberate and measured. Both turned, instinctively attentive. The Duke's expression remained controlled, yet the flicker in his eyes betrayed curiosity and caution. Eliza felt the heartbeat of the manor align with her own, aware that though their vows had been made, and though society's judgment had been momentarily deferred, there remained forces beyond their walls that might still challenge the fragile equilibrium they had carved. They stood together, facing the rising sun, the frost melting under light, and the promise of paths yet taken stretching beyond the gates. Neither spoke immediately. In that shared silence, the power of choice, of patience, and of courage resonated fully. They had arrived at safety without surrender, dignity without compromise, and love without imposition. Yet the world was not absent, only momentarily held at bay. Outside, the distant sound of hooves continued, measured, insistent, as if heralding a new chapter yet unwritten, a reminder that life's challenges and joys arrive together, and that their story, though secure in commitment, was only beginning to unfold beyond the sheltered walls of Ashcombe Manor.